In another lesson, we looked at the details of entering market orders versus limit orders and stop orders. Now we're coming up to a much higher level and talking about in what particular type of account can you do that? And the answer is in any type of account. Some people just open a taxable brokerage account. At the end of the year, they receive a Form 1099 where the broker-dealer shows capital gains, dividends, interest. And then that is used. You can use that when you're using TurboTax, or maybe you have a CPA, and then they can also add that into your income. Or sometimes they can use a net loss and reduce your taxable income. What we're talking about in this lesson are retirement plans. In a retirement plan, the investor can usually take a deduction on the contribution, but on the back end, typically, all money comes out at ordinary income tax rates. So whatever your effective tax rate is, or your marginal rate, however you look at that, that would be applied. But retirement plans usually offer that tax deduction on the contribution, but even when they don't, they have tax deferral. So instead of getting a 1099 and paying tax every year, you can just reinvest all that good stuff year after year after year. So it's a very smart tax move. For example, when you have a 401k plan or a traditional IRA, you're putting a few $1,000s in there every year. That reduces your taxable income, and then all the interest, dividends, capital gains can be reinvested year after year through tax deferral. As I said, most of the plans have deductible contributions. Some don't allow that. The traditional IRA is deductible. The Roth would be non-deductible. And we'll look at those individual plans, and we'll take a very brief look at employer-based plans, such as the simple, that could be an IRA or a 401k, the SEPIRA, etc. So what is tax deferral? As I said, in a brokerage account, which would be taxable, every year there's a 1099, and if it's interest and dividends, in most cases that's all going to be taxable at some rate. However, in a tax deferred account, instead of having to pay taxes every year, we can put up a barrier, whether it's your 401k or your traditional IRA, and then you can keep the tax man away, and year after year, your investment will grow faster through the beauty of what's called compounded returns. I'm going to let you Google that yourself because that's something that you should know about. So your account can grow a lot faster 20, 30, 40 years running if you don't have to deplete the funds every year by paying a tax bill. So it's never taxable? No, it grows faster, but in retirement, when you start to take withdrawals from a traditional IRA or a 401k, it's going to be ordinary income. There won't be a payroll tax, but if you receive $40,000 as a required minimum distribution, that's $40,000 of taxable income from a traditional IRA. All you need is earned income, so not passive income. If you were wealthy and owned a bunch of apartment buildings, that would probably all be passive income. Or even if you were earning dividends and interest only, that's not earned income. But basically, if you're working, you can contribute 100% of what you earn up to the current maximum. That's $6,000. Currently, it goes up every few years. And typically there's an extra $1,000 allowed if you're 50 or older. That's called a catch-up contribution. CATCH, not the condiment. This doesn't happen too often, but you do want to do the math correctly. Maybe you make a set contribution from every paycheck or when you receive your paycheck. If it's $6,000 for your maximum, if you put in $8,000, 6% would be the penalty on the excess. However, you can easily kind of wake up and recharacterize the excess for the next year, or just take it out by the tax filing deadline. So you don't hear about the 6% penalty often. This is a constant problem for most people. You had the best intentions when you start your traditional IRA, but now you're 41 and bad things are happening. You got to sell a bunch of stuff. That's still not enough money to cover it. Maybe I'll take some money out of my IRA. Well, money coming out of your traditional IRA is always taxable, but if you're not 59 and a half, there's a 10% penalty. So I'm going to take out $20,000. That's a $2,000 penalty. and $20,000 is taxable income. There are some ways around that, but they're pretty harsh. Death, if you inherit an IRA and the individual was 56, there's no 10% penalty, but it's still taxable to you. And you have many options in that case. Permanent disability, I need the money because I can't work, no 10% penalty. First time home purchase up to a certain amount, and then certain medical and education costs. So they're all taxable because money coming out of your traditional always is, but you can avoid the 10% penalty if you have a qualifying excuse. And then this has gone up fairly recently. It was 70.5 for many years. I was just using a calculator yesterday that FINRA put up on Twitter, and you say, okay, what's your age? What's the account balance? Okay, if you were to take your first required minimum distribution at 72, they used a rate of like 4.76% of the account, then they showed exactly how much I would take out. So the traditional provides a deduction when the money goes in, but on the way out it's taxable. Flip that around for the Roth IRA. There's no deduction. If I put in $6,000 this year, attaboy. What's the benefit? As long as I've had the account 5 years, which I have, and as long as you're 59.5, that money comes out tax-free. What do you mean not available to high-income individuals? Well, if you start to have some really good years, you might not be able to fund your Roth for that year, but you wouldn't have to close it down or anything. And you can have both a Roth and a traditional IRA. So those are the individual plans. These are plans that are sponsored by an employer. The defined benefit pension, kind of rare these days, but for every year you put in, maybe they say you earn 2.5%, and then after 30 years you max out at 75% of your final salary, and we pay that to you for the rest of your life. And we could even do it as a lump sum. I would think most people would take the annuity option, the monthly. And most plans are defined contribution, where the plan says we'll match up to this much, you can put this much in per year, and then what it's worth in the end, good luck. You bear the risk in the defined contribution plan, which would be most plans, 401k, 403b, profit sharing, etc. A simple plan, it's kind of interesting. It actually is pretty simple, but that's not what that stands for. It's for small businesses, and they can't have any other plan. But the best way it can be set up, and this is how we do it, we just have a one-page agreement with employees, and it says, if you contribute from your own paycheck, we will match dollar for dollar up to 3% of compensation. So that means if only a couple of employees care and the rest don't, the company's totally off the hook for the others. Only if the employees put money in, and then we match. And then if it's only up to 3%, and what would that be? $50,000 employee, $1,500 for the company. So the individual participant could put more than that, but the smart thing would be to put in at least enough to make the employer do the maximum matching contribution. Some companies have a SEP IRA. This would probably be a small group of highly compensated employees, maybe doctors, lawyers, etc. If the employer feels like it, so on a discretionary basis, they will make contributions in a fair manner. And it can be $50,000 a year if they wanted it to be. So the simple is for companies who want to help but don't have a lot of money to put for a retirement. Here it would be, if we want to do some very large contributions, this would be nice. But the employees do not make deductions from their paycheck. The employer would just make contributions, just like in a profit sharing plan. You've probably heard of the 401k. These allow for much higher annual contributions than either type of IRA. And usually the employer matches, often up to 6%. Here there's a vesting schedule, so it might take 3 years before the employee is entitled to all of the employer's contributions. Unlike the simple and the SEP, when the money goes into those accounts, the employees can do whatever they want with it. I don't think we're going to get into the top-heavy rules. We do that more in our Series 6, 7, 65 classes. I mentioned profit sharing. It's basically the same as a SEP. The contributions only come from the employer and only if they can. If that happens, of course, it has to be fair and done according to some stated formula. It would probably be either by seniority or if it were up to me, and it would be, I guess, if we had profit sharing, it would just be, well, Jimmy is 4% of payroll, Tommy is 10%, and we use those percentages. Or, sorry, another year, no contributions. This, if you could ever get one, it would be really tempting, you know. Here, the company bears all the risk. You just put in your time, and then you earn a percentage of your final salary, and your salary is rising over time. An actuary, if you're in the insurance business, you know that term. This requires an actuary to certify that, according to their calculations, the funding levels are sufficient to make payouts to retirees. But imagine how easy breezy retirement would be if you retired making $200,000 and you were now going to get 80% of that. Of course, that sounds better until you finally pull the trigger and realize, wow, my income just dropped 40 grand. But as you look into the future, I'm going to retire with 80% of my salary. You know, well, some people may have to do a second job, but it is a lot easier than having to manage your own investments in your IRA or your 401k. In the 401k, it's usually mutual funds and ETFs, but that's all the same exposure to the stock and bond market. So defined contribution, as we said, that passes all the investment risk to the participants. In olden days, you know, people retiring in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, the defined benefit pension was probably the most common way. But things change. Maybe we'll go back to that someday.